Excuse me. All right, folks. So here's where I mentioned we're gonna go down the stairs. So we're gonna be going down quite a few stairs to get to the level of the balcony house, and then we'll walk over to our first ladder. So we'll go ahead and make our way down. So one of the things that becomes very apparent as you stand out here, and even though we're in the shade, fortunately, because we're on an evening balcony house tour, which is the best time to take a balcony house tour, even then, when we were standing up top, water is a huge resource here. And one of the most important things for human life is water. So where do you get the water when you're in the middle of nowhere? There is no water at the bottom of these canyons. It's you might assume, especially if you've been to the Grand Canyon or something, that a river carved these. In actuality, that's not how these canyons formed. There's no river at the bottom. So where are people actually getting their water? The nearest constant source is several miles away in the Mancos River. So the actual answer to that is right here in front of us. It's these seep springs that occur in the cliff. So this is okay to touch. This is just sandstone right here. It's not that exciting. If you've ever felt a rock, that's what this feels like. But these alcoves form naturally, and that's where they would actually build the cliff dwellings inside of these alcoves. The sandstone just along a fracture line breaks off, falls, and then it's weakened originally by water, and that water comes out in these little seep springs. So if you are living here, this is going to be really important for you, because this is going to produce enough water, hopefully, to keep you sustained. These seep springs are fairly common. They are all over the canyon. In fact, there's another one inside of the village here. So there's another one inside of the Balcony House village. This one in particular has been dug out to create a bowl that will then fill with water, so that people can come down here and collect it in a jug. But of course, they wouldn't have needed to use this one nearly as much, because there's one in the village. Another important resource that you'll obviously be wondering about here is food. Where do people get food here? It's largely an agricultural society, so they're going to be farming predominantly on tops of the mesas. They're going to be farming up there, and that means that they are going to have to leave these cliff dwellings every day to get in and out. A lot of that is going to be in the form of hand and footholds that are carved into the rock to climb up out. They're not using ladders to get up and out. They're not using ropes. They're just climbing up and down. In fact, the route that we take to leave here today is one of the original routes to get into the balcony house. The hand and footholds have been expanded for modern human feet, but that is what you would have done. They would have been farming on the mesa tops, and they predominantly would have been growing corn, but they also would have been growing beans and squash. Squash is not a very drought-tolerant crop, which around here, it needs a lot of water. Around here, that means that you're going to have a hard time irrigating it when there is a drought. So they would carry water from these seep springs to their fields to hand irrigate them in times of drought, to keep themselves sustained. They also, that farming wasn't necessarily enough. They were also going to be supplementing that farming with a lot of hunting and gathering. That hunting is going to mostly be local stuff. So here, that's going to be squirrels, rabbits, that kind of thing. Being from West Virginia, I have eaten squirrel in a lot of different ways, and have eaten probably squirrel in ways that you didn't know you could cook squirrel. But I digress. Squirrel's delicious, by the way. It tastes like possum, if you've ever had that. That's my favorite thing to do. Is I'll tell people, like, I've eaten squirrel, and they'll be like, "What's squirrel taste like?" And it's like possum. You say, "What's possum taste like?" It's like raccoon. What's raccoon taste like? It's like rabbit. Just keep going until you run out of things to compare to. But at any rate, squirrels. They would have been, hunting a lot of squirrels and rabbits around here. They also would have been doing some organized big game hunting in the fall. That probably around here would have been a lot of mule deer, because that's what we have a lot of here. You may have noticed we have a lot of mountain mahogany growing along the trail. Mountain mahogany is like candy for mule deer. They love the stuff. So there's a lot of mule deer up here, and that's largely what they would have been hunting, but they also would have been going after bighorn sheep, which we don't have here anymore, and elk. And other things like that. And they also domesticated turkeys. Turkeys are an important resource, but not necessarily for food. They may have eaten turkey eggs, but I can't say that for sure. But what they did use turkeys for was feathers. As turkeys molt about 3 times a year, they would gather the feathers and create turkey feather blankets. If you've been to Canyons of the Ancients Visitor Center across Cortez, if you haven't, you should go. They have a turkey feather blanket replica that you can view, which is pretty cool. For about the last 100 years of them living here, they did actually eat the turkeys. But for a long time, it was just for feathers. They would also tether the turkeys. They would make a little stone with a groove in it about the size of a tennis ball. They would tie that to the turkey, and it would just roll along with the turkey, which is pretty cool. And that was how they avoided clipping their feathers to keep them from flying away like modern poultry farmers do, because they were farming them for feathers. So that's pretty, I thought it was interesting. Hello, Howard. I'm doing all right. Oh, you're
You're fine, Layla. What's it?
311, 216, your last came through broken.
Made it. I made it alive.
You did it good.
I hate it when the ladder's shaking like that.
It's okay.
So all the people have looked in for more than a century. It's an advertisement for hand sanitizer. Is what it is.
That's how they built it. Is it like?
We were climbing that ladder, and I did downstairs, and I was like,
So this is the original. You saw it.
that's kind of scary. I didn't know it was fine, and also, this was cool. Had like a better time. Any of the 3 legs. Well, you got 4 on that one. That's what you find. You got 3 on that one.
Not a lot.
The most unappealing thing.
Yes.
Tried to think of why it's called the balcony house. A lot of people assume it's because of where we're standing. Looks like a balcony. This does look like a balcony to us now, what we would think of as a balcony, but this is actually not what we're referring to. This is more of the front yard of this structure. The balcony actually refers to this thing right behind me over here. This is a balcony in the sense that it was used then. These are not windows. These are doors. So you can easily see somebody hopping out of this, walking across the balcony, and going back in the other side. We think of these as static structures, as having been built and then lived in for a while and then left. We forget that people live their lives in here. Think of how complicated a single day in your life is, and then think of how complicated a single year in your life is, and expand that to your entire life. Those are all happening for people inside of these structures here. You can see change over time demonstrated in these buildings. One of the things that you see is clear evidence that these two buildings were not constructed at the same time. These were constructed at different times. First of all, there's a big crack down the middle. One side looks completely different than the other. Another thing that you'll notice is that on this side, the balcony has single juniper beams. On this side, it has double juniper beams. Why there's two on this side, one on that side, I don't know. Point is, it's evidence that these were created at different times. If I go over here, excuse me, we got more remodeling evidence. One of the things that you'll see over here, very clearly there used to be a door here. At some point in time, somebody decided that this door was no longer necessary, so they closed it up and made it a window. And then at some point in time, somebody realized that this window was no longer necessary, so they closed it up completely and made it a wall. If you look above this, you'll see a square on the ceiling, where clearly the walls used to go up to that point, and it's black on the inside, probably from a fire that was inside of this building over here. So these are all evidence of this kind of dynamic change that we have over time, people living their whole lives in here. People would have been walking around, having their normal, day in, day out reality. People would have been living their whole lives here. You'd have children playing in the front yard. You'd have, a couple having an argument, a mom yelling at her kids. Like, all these things happen these are common human experiences that people had then too, is what I'm trying to get at. So now that we're kind of, up here, this is the part of the tour where I mentioned, it's kind of informal. I want to know what you want to know, and I'll answer your questions. So what we got over here?
I think maybe I was saying a second ago that this is where they did stuff to their food, maybe they ground flour and cooked stuff.
Yes, they absolutely.
And maybe that was where they because it doesn't, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, they absolutely would have been, cooking and eating out here, especially inside of the buildings. There would have been fires inside of the kivas, which are in the next room. We'll talk about those in a little bit. But yeah, people were living their entire lives here, for sure. What's up?
So there's obviously multiple of these dwellings. Do we know if is this like a community here, or is it like a wider community where they...
Kind of a wider community. There were more people living here then than there are now. And a lot of, they're not just living in the cliffs too, they're living on the mesa tops as well. And in fact, it was, for most of human history in this area, people were living on the tops of the mesas. And it wasn't until the last 100 years that people started moving down into the cliffs. We often think of that as a transition, but it's really more of an expansion. There are still people living on the mesa tops while there were people living in the cliffs.
Are there any historical sites left on top of Mesa?
Yes. In fact, we have an entire driving loop dedicated to that. You can drive around the Mesa Top Loop. It's presented very chronologically there, so you'll see the oldest ones first, and then you'll go around and see the newer ones. But yeah, so there were definitely people moving in and out of each of these and moving to other parts of the park.
Do you know anything about what makes this guy a cliff person? You're a cliff person.
Yeah.
I'm done with this mesa. I'm climbing down there.
Sure. I imagine you would probably be, if you grew up here, you probably would just, live here. But it's hard to say, who decided. I mean, there clearly was something that drew them down here, but it's hard to say exactly what. But yeah, it could have been to be closer to a resource down here, or could have been just protection from weather. There's probably a lot of different reasons. I mean, if you think about any move in your life, I know I've certainly moved a lot. Any move in your life is going to have a whole lot of reasons behind it. So. Yeah.
My dad was in the Air Force, and we've moved like 7 times, or 5 or 7 times.
Yeah, I can relate to it. I promise.
Do you know the life expectancy of people who live?
Yeah. When you talk about life expectancy for any historical population, it's going to be heavily skewed lower by a high infant mortality rate, which is just how things were in those days. So I believe if you're just looking at the raw number, it's probably going to be mid-30s. But if you lived past like 5 or 6 years old, you were probably going to make it well into your 50s, you know. So.
I know you said they mostly use like foot and handholds, but were there any places that they would use ladders?
Yeah, probably. This is a ladder right here, and they probably would have used something like this in some places. Yeah. Some kivas also have ladders. Some have stairs. Some you just hop in here, and then mud built on top of that. So, yep. And you've got these are all juniper beams as well.
Yummy powdered sugar, strawberries.
What do you use?
What?
This is more fun. Ladders.
Okay, let's go.
This is a wooden ladder.
What are these big pits in front of us? These are called kivas. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning of my tour, I am not Pueblo. You're not going to learn everything that there is to learn about Pueblo culture or history from me. But I did want to go ahead and give a couple of kind of observations about kivas. First of all, explain to you what they are. Kivas are used for religious or ceremonial purposes primarily. Where it's a private space, lots of different uses for kivas. But you're going to have a fire in the middle there, and then you get a ventilation hole here, and that wall there is to block the breeze from the ventilation hole from putting out the fire. You're also going to have a little hole next to the fire pit that you can see really well in these ones. Those are called a sipapu. It has to do with the Pueblo origin story and the connection to the underworld. So that is what those are.
These holes?
Nope, the little hole there next to the fire pit.
Okay, let's still what are these holes?
Those are, that clearly is a ventilation hole that was built and then didn't work out very well because there's no hole at the bottom there. So they built another one over here. That's going to be a ventilation hole to kind of, vent the kiva out because you've got a fire putting off smoke in there. Another thing that you would have had that was different than from now with these kivas is that they would have had a roof over them. So in a kiva, you'll see a roof with these stone columns. You'll see beams stretched across them, juniper beams, and then you'll have perpendicular beams on top of that. That'll be the foundation upon which you'll build your roof. So that's the basic explanation of what a kiva is. These are deeper kivas than usual. Usually they're not quite this deep. And then some have stairs, some have ladders. It just depends on how you climb down. So with that said, another thing too that I like to address on some of these tours is some myths and misconceptions about the people who lived here. First of all, one of the things you'll hear is that, even in old park literature, you'll see the word disappeared used a lot. Like they lived here until 1270 and then they've just gone. That's not how it happened. We know exactly where they went. People who lived here were the ancestral Puebloans, and they moved and became the modern Pueblo that we have around now. There are 21 different Pueblos. They are in various areas of the country. 19 of them are in New Mexico. As I mentioned, I'm not Pueblo, but if you want to learn about Pueblo culture, I can tell you how to do that. And that is to go visit them yourself. The best way to do that is to go on the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center's website. They are in Albuquerque, and they have a calendar of events for the 19 Pueblos that live in New Mexico. So you can go and meet the people, see the culture, taste the food at feast days and stuff. They feed you very well, and it is delicious. So if you have time, you should go. That's the best way if you want to learn about that kind of stuff. That's where you should go to do that. Another thing you'll hear them refer to, is even in Old Park literature, as the Anasazi. That's a term that some of you have probably seen written down before. The reason we don't use that anymore is because it's not a Pueblo word, it's a Navajo word. In Navajo, it means ancient ones, but in Pueblo, it means enemy. So I wouldn't want my grandparents to be described as my enemies, so that's why we don't use that word anymore. On that note though, this is kind of time that I like to give to you, because we've got about 15 minutes left on our tour before we need to actually get out of here. So, for the folks who are here, I'm going to be around to answer questions, but this is kind of time that I want you to be able to, take it in. And then when it's time for us to go, I'll go ahead and move everybody out. Or you can leave on your own if you want to have that time to reflect on your own. These are powerful places to a lot of people. They're very important to a lot of people. When I'm here, especially as somebody who considers myself to be an outdoorsman, these folks were very avid outdoorsmen. They spend every day doing it. And I think a lot about the people who came before me who did the same kinds of things as I do. On that note, I'll kind of let you enjoy the place for yourself, and then we'll all get out of here.
Do you, when you transfer to, when you do this, do you have to do?
You do, in most parks, you do a pretty long training. I will say, when I got here, they kind of threw me to the wolves. I only got 3 days of training here, and then they obviously do programs. So we don't do any tours in the winter. We're actually, what is it, the 13th, 10 days in the museum, which is just about all we have staffing for in the winter. Or back end of the year.
It might end up being a lucky ventilation because
I do, yeah. Some people do, some people don't. Park does provide housing, but some people prefer.
It's a rectangle.
These rooms, it's hard to say, but it's hard to say. What's that? I don't know, maybe.
not a good chance that they would do
So if you couldn't tell by the video, you need to be in fair shape for this. There's a lot of walking, a lot of stairs, a lot of ladders. You can't be scared of heights because you got to climb some fairly decent sized ladders. And you also have to be able to fit through some tight places. So take that for what it's worth. And I thought it was worth a mention, just so nobody come up with any surprises, because that first ladder did get a few people that wasn't able to climb it. So, yep, there you go. And there's plenty of ladders along the way here, as you can see here. We're just about on the last one.
That's about wrap our tour at the balcony house. It was pretty neat, but if you have knee problems, that's probably not a good place for you to tour. So there's this is the view from the balcony house. All right, guys, see you later. Bye.